Okay, so we're going to get started. So hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to today's Resident Doctors of Canada webinar, How You Can Help Shape Your Residency Program Through Accreditation. My name is Ali Damji, and I'm a PGY2 in Family Medicine at the University of Toronto. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce our panelists for tonight's discussion, Dr. Terry Colbourne and Dr. Maggie Moores. Dr. Colbourne is a PGY5 resident in respirology at the University of Manitoba. He was a member of the RDoC Board of Directors and is the past accreditation team co-lead and training committee co-chair at Resident Doctors of Canada. He has been a resident surveyor on Royal College accreditation survey teams for external reviews and full accreditation reviews, and has spearheaded the development of the new RDoC pre-accreditation questionnaire. Dr. Moores is a PGY3 resident in neurology at the University of Ottawa. She was the accreditation team co-lead at Resident Doctors of Canada and a member of RDoC's training committee. She has been a resident surveyor on Royal College accreditation survey teams for external reviews and has also spearheaded the development of the new RDoC pre-accreditation questionnaire. Thank you both for joining us. And before we start, I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items. So this webinar is also being recorded and will be posted on the RDoC YouTube channel at a later date. So if you have any colleagues that were unable to fit tonight's discussion into their schedule, please let them know about the recording. Your questions can also be submitted via the chat window built into the Zoom application. So please, at any time, feel free to jump in with your questions, and as the moderator, I'll make sure to ask them on your behalf. To start off, for those participants who may not be thoroughly familiar with the residency accreditation in Canada process, would you guys be willing to give an overview of what's involved?
Absolutely, Ali. So can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Accreditation in Canada is a process by which the colleges who have now joined together as a consortium of residency accreditation bodies in Canada, specifically the CFBC and the Royal College, as well as the CMQ in Quebec, have come together and developed a set of standards by which programs are evaluated to ensure that there's consistency and quality across all training programs in postgraduate medical education in Canada. It's a system that's undergone a lot of change in the last couple of years, and they've been prototyping a number of new developments, including a fully electronic system by which all of the accreditation system is run. And it previously was a 6-year cycle, and now it's an 8-year cycle of regular on-site reviews, which they bring together a large team of surveyors and visit universities in a kind of university by university basis, rotating through the country. Every institution is meant to be visited every 8 years, as I said, and every program is visited as part of those visits. And they use a number of standards to evaluate each individual program as well as the institution themselves, again, to ensure that there's quality of training and equality of training across all programs and all the sites within each university.
So thanks for that, Terry. Maggie, do you have anything to add?
I guess specifically what residents can expect when they're going through an accreditation is that all the programs are accredited to these national standards set out, as Terry said, by the various involved bodies. And so during the survey visit that occurs every 8 years, the goal is to ensure that all of the programs are meeting these standards, and with the new standards, there's a way to exceed expectations as well as meet the minimum standards. And if there are any concerns or a significant number of concerns raised at this regular review, then a program gets reviewed more often and with internal, external reviews, although this language is changing. And then the survey team gives recommendations, although it's the Royal College that gives the final say on the accreditation status of each program.
Thank you. So next, what I'll do is we have some follow-up questions to ask you, but again, I'll put it out to the crowd that's here that if you have any questions you'd like to be asked, just send them in the chat, and I'm happy to ask those. So our first question is, why is accreditation important to residents as a whole, and why is it our biggest opportunity to improve a residency program?
So I can start again. So the reason why accreditation is extremely important to residents is this is basically the bar by which our program standards or our training program are set. So if, for example, there were concerns that were being raised within your program and they applied to the standards by which your program is being measured, that would be the opportunity for real change to happen. To be advocated by a third party, in this case, the Royal College or the CFPC, depending on what type of program you're going through. And you know, I think we all experiences a lot of challenges through our training, and some of them some of those are perhaps applicable to the standards by which our programs are being evaluated, and perhaps some of those aren't, but may relate, for example, to contractual issues with our PHOs. And so I think there's just basically, you know, it's one of the many avenues by which we have to advocate for positive change in the system of training that we're all going through. And as Maggie said, there's also an opportunity for you to highlight system innovation, ways that your program has really gone above and beyond what's expected based on the minimum standards. And I think that is meant to lend itself as an opportunity for others to learn, be it the surveyors themselves or a way for those surveyors to learn from that innovation and advertise that to the system as a whole, and provide opportunities for others to also enhance the training programs that they're responsible for in other parts of the country or even within the institution themselves.
Great, thank you. Anything to add there, Maggie? Otherwise, we can move to the next question.
All good.
Okay, so the next question is, my program is being reviewed during an on-site accreditation visit. What are the essential things that I and all residents need to be aware of so we can prepare for that visit?
I can start this one. I think the most important thing to be aware of is that the time for the residents to really have their voices when the residents meet as a group. Sometimes they're divided by juniors and seniors depending on the size of the program, or multiple groups, but oftentimes it's the entire resident body that meets with the surveyors. And this is really the chance to talk about the strengths and, more importantly, arguably the weaknesses of your program and room for improvement in the program. And so in order to prepare for this usually 1 hour meeting, like to make the most of this meeting, it is important to get together as a resident group to talk openly and honestly about strengths, but also weaknesses of the programs and things where residents would like to see change. It's helpful if you can map some of these things back to the standards. As Terry said, sometimes these things are more contractual issues, and so, but you can often turn some of these things into an issue with the standard. So for example, if there's an issue with post-call days being on call too much, instead of making it a contract issue, you could turn it around to say, hey, I'm concerned about the service to education ratio of my program, which is a standard. And so being aware of what the weaknesses are of your program and how to get the attention of the survey team will be very important.
Thanks, that was really well put. Terry?
Absolutely, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure, I'll jump.
Oh, I think, Terry, we're losing you a bit. Is your microphone on?
I cut out there, I think.
Okay, I think we have you again, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So the on-site review involves a series of interviews with different groups who are involved with the training and have different perspectives on the training program itself. So in the case of a resident, they would be typically grouped with a number of other residents, be it their entire resident cohort, or they may be split by years, or they may be split by different training programs. For example, if there's a group of competency by design residents who had recently undergone implementation of that CBME change in our system, they may be grouped together, and then residents who are part of the more traditional time-based training program and would be therefore more senior in the training program may be grouped together. And it's actually a very short interview. It only lasts an hour, and there's a myriad of things that the surveyors are very interested in learning about the program. And so really knowing what you would want to highlight about, both positive and negative about your program ahead of time will help to ensure that there's consistency in some of the responses to the questions. And will also help kind of triangulate where some of the issues may lie. And so as prepared as you can be and as applicable as they are to the standards is helpful. But just know that, you know, the surveyors are there not there to punish you, or certainly not to punish your program. They're really there to learn and to enhance the quality of your program through a continuous quality improvement loop.
Thanks, Terry. So next, we'll move on to the next question. So, is there an opportunity to provide feedback on my program confidentially before that big review?
Yeah, so this is a good opportunity for us to advertise our pre-accreditation questionnaire that Ali had highlighted our involvement in at the start of the call. So Resident Doctors for about 35 years now has been putting out a pre-accreditation questionnaire to all residents who are about to undergo an on-site review. And this recently underwent a large overhaul that Maggie and I were involved with, as well as a number of other residents and the RDoC staff from across the country. This involves a set of questions that pertain to the accreditation standards, trying to learn more about every individual program and every individual resident's experience. And that information is collected and then by the PHOs and reported, collated and reported back to surveyors, specifically resident surveyors who are involved in the accreditation process. And it's meant to kind of provide us with information going in so that we know which resident programs would be best to visit, and also in those short 1-hour interviews with the resident stakeholders, what issues we should be focused on. Actually, not just with the resident surveyors, but also with all the and department administrative leads. Opportunity, and I should also say that it's not the only opportunity. I think every opportunity that residents have to provide feedback to their program locally should also be undertaken, so that the the appropriate to
Oh, Terry, it looks like we're losing your connection again.
Hello?
Hey, Terry, we missed the last part of what you said there.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, we're still having difficulty with your connection. Terry, can you try saying something?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I just said maybe Maggie can step in and maybe finish my thought so that my internet can settle down.
I think I'm trying to read your mind, but I think the end of the thought is that in addition to the pre-accreditation questionnaire, you're trying to talk about other opportunities to give feedback to the program before the accreditation visit, which I think we'll touch on more a bit later specifically. I'm not sure.
Sure, no problem.
Or if or maybe there's another point you had in there, sorry.
No, that's exactly what I was saying. So I was just trying to say that programs and postgraduate offices should be hearing about issues independent of our accreditation cycle, so that they can act and implement the channels that they have locally to try to make the positive changes that accreditation is really meant to reinforce. And so, not every resident's going to have an opportunity to go through an accreditation cycle. And so I think it's important that we all highlight that we should be trying to give programs an opportunity to make positive changes whenever possible through the evaluation processes like the resident program committee that we all have representatives on.
Okay, thank you both for those thoughtful answers. Next, I wanted to ask if there's a problem sort of in the program that comes up prior to this, and you were sort of getting at this in your question, but how specifically should residents be raising these before accreditation happens?
Do you want to continue your thoughts there, Terry? Or
sure. So you're talking about, Ali, independent of an accreditation visit?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, there's going to be many opportunities at every institution with every program, but I think everybody's going to experience a little bit about that feedback loop differently. And so you may have, different issues are going to have different sensitivities involved. And so if it's an issue, for example, with regards to your program director, you're welcome to speak to that program director, but you may not be comfortable doing so. And so I think you need to consider what the issue is. But I think, one of the ways by which we accredit or evaluate programs based on our accreditation standards is their ability to make these changes and receive feedback from residents. And importantly, we're supposed to have resident representation on our resident program committees, for example, and those committees are the ones who are responsible for setting out the curriculum and the way by which the curriculum is delivered for residents. If you had issues about your RPC or about your program director, or about the representatives and the leadership involved with your training, then I think an important next step might be the postgraduate office. But I think, it's important as well, even with accreditation, but independent of that, is that you're trying to learn if you're the only one experiencing those issues, and then maybe it's a personal conflict, but leaning on your peers to try to figure out the best way to handle every situation is important with the accreditation process, but also independent of that.
I guess I would just add that sometimes during accreditation, issues come up that haven't actually been raised to the program director, RPC, PGME, whatever the appropriate body is. And part of accreditation, every program is probably going to have issues at some point. It's not so much the issue, but what have you done to try to deal with it, and what has the program been able to do to help deal with this issue? So saving a problem for accreditation, it's still helpful, but sometimes it might be doing you a disservice, and there might not be as much weight put into it as if the problem had arose previously and still was persistent and hadn't been fixed despite efforts from multiple layers. So bringing any problems up early with whatever body you feel comfortable is very important.
So I actually had a follow-up question about this and sort of what you guys are saying. So I've heard, sometimes there are challenges with the accreditation visits because the interviews are often done with groups of residents. And so sometimes people are a bit afraid to raise concerns in front of their peers because, they may worry that what if they're, one of their peers tells, a program director or someone else that, so-and-so said something during the accreditation review. And that's why now this is a problem within our program. So in these visits, is there ever the opportunity to interview residents one-on-one or sort of try and balance that or protect the confidentiality?
So generally speaking, it's rare for programs to have their residents scheduled on a smaller group or individual basis. It does happen when it's anticipated that there are issues within the program that are particularly sensitive, and so that precedent has been set before. But I think, generally speaking, we're relying on kind of a common.
Hey, Terry, we're losing you again. Maybe just wait a second just for it to reconnect with you.
Okay, I'll keep talking.
Okay.
I'm not saying much. Tell me when to start again.
You're good.
Yeah.
I'm good now? Okay. I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about opportunities to meet one-on-one with the program.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that it doesn't happen that often, and if it does happen, it's because there are some issues anticipated. And I think if a resident program, like if a number of residents were uncomfortable with going with the interview process, the group interview process, that's something that is certainly raised to their program to see if something could be arranged. But more importantly than that, I would say is that resident confidentiality as part of accreditation is something that's taken very, very seriously. And no resident would ever be identified as part of the reporting process that goes back to the Royal College or the CFPC. And no individual resident or group of residents would be specifically identified as having named something. And oftentimes what actually comes through accreditation is that the issues that get brought up repeatedly throughout the day. And so if a resident is experiencing that and they bring it up, oftentimes it's because it's being brought up by multiple groups. So the faculty, the resident program committee, programs are generally, and the people who are in the training environment are generally aware assure that confidentiality is a huge part of this. But of course, we're relying on everyone to be on board with that process. And so residents who are experiencing accreditation really need to keep in mind that this is supposed to be an open and honest forum, and identifying who is saying what during these interviews is felt to be kind of a big no-no. And so I think respecting your colleagues is
Thanks for that, Terry. Maggie, do you have anything to add to that question?
That's perfect, thanks.
Okay. So next, kind of going into, I guess, some of the practicalities about it. So what are some tips for residents when the on-site interviews actually are happening with the Royal College or with the CFPC?
I alluded earlier to meeting before to knowing what you're hoping to highlight, but when you're actually in the interview, it's often helpful if you've identified a lead. So sometimes it's usually a chief. It's important to be as open and honest as possible and making an agreement amongst the residents that whatever happens stays in the room, and reminding each other that accreditation isn't punishment, it's for celebrating successes and improving the programs, and that this in no way prohibits you from finishing your residency. And so during the interview, there's no reason not to just be honest. And sometimes the interviewers, if there's an issue you want them to bring up, they may or may not focus on that or kind of seem to brush it off. And that's just because there's so much to get through. And so it's trying not to be, trying to allow them to drive the conversation a little bit as well.
Great, thank you. Terry, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Maggie hit it on the head. I think it's really important to support your colleagues. And if you've identified a lead among your group to sort of identify things, I think hopefully you've had a chance to talk about them beforehand. And it's really important to the surveyors that it's not coming from just one person, that, you know, if there's a big issue that's a common experience for residents, that everyone is experiencing it and it's brought up in that sort of unanimous and supportive way. If there's a lot of infighting among the residents during the interview, it's really hard as a surveyor to figure out what exactly the issue is and what the common experience is and how it relates back to the standards. And so having some consistency in your feedback is I think the best way to put your best foot forward in terms of making changes.
Great, thank you. So are residents represented on the Royal College and the CFPC survey teams? You've alluded to it, but just to confirm.
Yeah, so Meg and I are both part of Royal College programs, so that would be what our experience is. But we have residents on both teams of surveyors. And now that the institution is being individually accredited, there's also a resident on the institutional survey team. So they're more involved in going around to different sites as well as visiting with administrators and accrediting the institution on a kind of higher level set of standards. For the Royal College programs, we have one resident assigned to the team for every 20 programs. So larger institutions will have more residents on the team and also more surveyors overall. And smaller institutions would have fewer residents, obviously. The residents themselves they visit 1 to 2 one program per day generally. Some of the larger programs, the actual site visit is split up over 2 days, and so they may only visit 2 or 3 if they are visiting some of the larger programs. And as I said before, part of the way we decide which programs we're visiting based on some good things that we've heard about it or some potentially negative or areas for improvement is through that pre-accreditation questionnaire. And so that's how we decide where we're going, and that's why that information is extremely important to us, so that we're not kind of deciding and scheduling ourselves in a blind manner.
And so what happens afterwards, like after the accreditation visit is done?
So after the accreditation visit, the survey teams meet at night and review the day. Reports are compiled and they go back to the specialty committees. So there would be like a CFPC, there's like but for the specialties, it would be, you know, whatever surgical or medical specialty has their own committee, and they review the information, and then this goes back to the Royal College Accreditation Committee, who reviews the other reports and details, compares with a whole bunch of documentation, and then comes up with a decision letter that goes back to the program and to the PGME office to say, okay, you're accredited, or you're accredited with an extra visit required, that sort of thing.
Anything to add, Terry?
No, I don't have anything to add. So yeah, we meet as a team and we decide what our recommendation is going to be. That's seen by the survey committee. The survey committee also sees a lot of the materials that are provided by the program the specialty committee is also has an opportunity to review a lot of things about the program, and they'll have questions that they pose that are supposed to be answered on the day of the site visit. And so a lot of those questions get put back, the answers to those questions get put back to the specialty committee, and then they either agree or disagree with the recommendation provided by the survey team. And then several months later, the final stamp is put on by either the CFBC or the Royal College accreditation committees. And then based on that, they're assigned an outcome. So that might be the full accreditation regular review, which will happen 8 years down the road, as I said. Or the opposite end of the spectrum is that they could be put on what's called notice of intent to withdraw, which mandates a 2-year follow-up visit by an external team that comes back. It doesn't mean that the program is going to lose their accreditation status, but it means that they need to make some changes to their program, or the possible outcome with that follow-up visit in 2 years is that they lose their accreditation status. In between that is a follow-up without that threat of loss of accreditation status, or there could also be just a kind of what was previously known as kind of a progress report. But this is just a written feedback that areas for improvement have been addressed by the program to the satisfaction of the surveyors and the accreditation committees at both sites.
I guess as a follow-up to that, if a program were to lose its status, does that mean that the residents are then not able to finish the residency and have to go elsewhere, or what exactly happens?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I think it's the fear that's at the top of everyone's mind. And I want to emphasize that what I said in the last answer is that being put on notice of intent to withdraw requires 2 years of work for a program to address the areas for improvement that were identified. And almost always that's what happens. So it's extremely rare for a program to lose their accreditation status. And more often, an institution or a program may realize that they're not going to be able to make the changes that are necessary for a program to be healthy. And they may, for example, withdraw their program status voluntarily. In the cases where a program, after going through years of work to try to fix things, is unable to, fix it to the point where it's a functional program, then oftentimes what has happened in the past is that the residents from that program have been reassigned to other training programs elsewhere. So it's not that you won't be able to be trained. It would be the responsibility for the institution to reassign you. But if a program isn't healthy enough to provide the training for the residents, then that program would no longer exist, and they would have to be relocated to somewhere where that's possible. Again, this happens so rarely that I think it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. But that's my understanding of the potential outcome there, and it's not something that's emphasized because it happens so rarely. Maggie, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that.
No, just to note, regardless of what happens to your program, that there's lots of support if there are conflicts amongst residents or between faculty and residents or whoever it might be. So you can reach out to your local PHO representatives, so Para, RDoC, all of these residents and staff are around to help you, as well as PGME.
Great, thank you both for that. Just before I move on to the next question, I just want to remind the audience here that you're free to ask questions as well. So just send them in the chat, and we can bring those questions forward. And I'll give you another opportunity as well towards the end. But again, feel free at any time to send those forward. You don't need to wait. The next question is kind of switching gears now to competence by design and triple C. With the changes that are coming, how is accreditation changing in your guys' opinion?
So, it's two big system changes that are happening at the same time. So accreditation has gone through a full reform within the last few years, as I mentioned. Triple C curriculum was implemented a few years back now, and all family medicine programs have adhered to that new curricular paradigm. And now CBME is making its way into the Royal College specialty programs. So it has changed the lens by which some of the accreditation standards were designed, but importantly, all programs are being accredited in the exact same way. So the standards are all designed so that they're applicable to both the traditional time-based programs that previously existed, and now that sort of hybrid competency-based programs that currently existed. And importantly, as CBME is being implemented in these programs, programs are required to show that they remain functional despite the big changes that everyone is going through. And so residents need to be experiencing training in an ongoing positive way, whether they're part of the traditional cohort or the new CBME cohort. I think the accreditation reforms that are happening are great, and they're with CBME in mind, but they're not specific to CBME. And so residents from traditional training programs, whether they've implemented CBME or not, will still continue to experience accreditation in the same way that these new programs will.
Maggie, anything to add?
No, it was well said.
Great, thank you. My last question for you two is around residents' opinions. And so in your opinion, and based on your experience, which is quite extensive with this, do you feel that resident opinions are valued in accreditation?
Absolutely. It's arguably the most important part of an accreditation visit, whether it's in the pre-survey questionnaire or whether it's in the actual meeting. I think that's arguably the most valuable hour of the survey team's day, is meeting with the residents and hearing their opinions and hearing what they think could be changed or improved. And it's natural for there to be a little bit of disagreement amongst the residents, but they're just searching for those big issues, and that's the residents' opinion is the most valuable thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's always the visit or the interview of most emphasis throughout the day for all of these site visits is the one with the residents. And, I think that's kind of a reflection of how we really should be experiencing our training. So the most healthy programs are the ones that take resident feedback seriously and deal with it in an appropriate manner. And I think that's a big part of what accreditation is about, is ensuring that residents' rights and interests are being respected, and that their training program is set up so that they're put in the best position possible to be successful both during their training, but also while they transition into practice. And so I think that, that's a reflection of the system as a whole, but not only are the residents' opinions valued in terms of the ones who are experiencing the training program, but also the residents who are participating in these surveys as surveyors. If we have opinions about how a specific issue might be treated as it pertains to a standard, we are just as much a member of the survey team as any other faculty member in the room at the time. We fully vote. And I think that it's a huge positive aspect of our accreditation system is the way that resident feedback and interest and membership in how accreditation is undertaken is put together. And I think it's a huge kudos to the Canadian system, and one that's reflected in a number of other places around the world.
Great, thank you both for that. That was well said. So I actually do have a question from the audience. So this question is, how are surveyors matched to review each program? And so they've given an example where they had an internal review, and it was clear that the surveyors that were there had a very poor sense of what their specialty was and how the program operates. Is there an effort to match surveyors from the same specialty to the accreditation that's going on?
So it's actually the opposite. So because there is sensitive things that are brought up, and Canada is such a small training environment, in that I think everyone tends to know people across the country within their own specialty. We try to take people who are not from those specialties to be able to provide a bit of an outside perspective, and to also allow for the most open and honest feedback available. When we as residents are choosing which programs we go to, we try to apply the same sort of mantra. So myself as an internal medicine resident previously, and currently a respirology resident, haven't been involved in the accreditation of either internal medicine or respirology programs by design. And that's because I think I'm a little bit too close to that training. You're right in that there is maybe a little bit lost in terms of I may not understand all the nuances of training within psychiatry or within radiology. But I think the flip side of that I had mentioned with in terms of being able to provide open and honest feedback is probably more important. And there are, compared to the specialty specific standards, the general standards of accreditation is a much longer list. And I think importantly, we just should be experiencing training in a similar framework, not necessarily specific to, say, the medical expert aspects of that training. Where there are issues that are specialty specific that come up, one of two things will happen. We'll try to clarify what the issue is as much as possible within the short time frame that we have with the on-site visit. But if it's really clear that there are specialty specific issues within a program that require follow-up because it may be an area for improvement, then I think what sometimes happens is that programs maybe get accredited with a external review and follow-up in a couple of years, and they'll actually invite members of that specialty to be part of the survey team that comes back in a couple of years to re-review, but only if it's an issue that is clearly affecting the training within that program. The other thing that I would say is if there's something that's specialty specific and the surveyors don't really understand, that's why we bring back some of these issues and discuss them as a larger survey team. So that, for example, I could comment as an internal medicine resident, like, I think that's a common experience that people experience within internal medicine, and that's just the way that's done. And this is why it's not in conflict with that accreditation standard. And that's why that big team meeting at the end of the day is very valuable. That doesn't happen with the internal review process. And I think that's why that may have been experienced by the resident who would have gone through that.
Great. Anything to add, Maggie? No? Okay. Well, thank you for that answer, Terry. So I'm just going to put it out to the group just in the last few minutes that we have. If there's any other questions that anyone would like to ask, I'll give you a minute or so just to see if there's anything there before we wrap up. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any other questions. I think you guys have just answered everything and given the most comprehensive review of accreditation that's ever been done in about 40 minutes. So great work to you two. With that, I'd like to thank both of you so much, both Dr. Colbourne and Dr. Moores, for an amazing discussion tonight. And before we sign off, to those that are watching, I'd really like to invite you to check out the accreditation webpage that's available on the Resident Doctors of Canada website, which is related to this topic. You can find it at www.residentdoctors.ca/areas-of-focus/accreditation. We've also developed an accreditation video series on RDoC's YouTube channel, which can show you about accreditation and what it is and how it impacts residents. As always, if you have any questions at all, please contact us at training@residentdoctors.ca. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and have a great evening.